After finishing medical school, I settled in Florida with a plan to open a funeral home. My grandparents raised me after my dad died of a drug overdose. I also never got the chance to meet my mother. I would always see other kids cherishing the love of their parents, which made me feel like I missed out on a normal childhood. I had a girlfriend in college, but she stopped answering my calls out of nowhere one day. I was thinking of showing up at her door to confront her, but then I met Scarlett. I was embalming a newly arrived body when my doorbell rang. I punctured the lungs and attached the drain pipes for the fluids to flow out. When the doorbell rang one more time. Coming! Jeez, what's the rush? Coming, I said.
So sorry to bother you like this. You must be Mr. Miller, the funeral home director?
A woman in her late 20s stood in front of me with a troubled face. Even though she looked worried, I couldn't help but notice her attractive features. She had beautiful blue eyes which hypnotized me at first glance. I stood there like an idiot who forgot to talk for at least 10 to 15 seconds. The woman spoke again.
Mr. Miller?
Yes, please come in.
I'm Scarlett. I lived with my grandma on the outskirts. She died 2 days ago from a sudden heart attack. Our pastor told me about you, so I came here.
After listening to this, I was sure she was going to ask me to prepare her grandma for her funeral. However, I had to wonder, if her grandma died 2 days earlier, then why did she come now? I mean, who keeps a dead body for 2 days and then goes to a mortician? Scarlett read my mind.
You must be wondering why I waited 2 days to come here. I have an odd situation. My grandma's last wish was a bit frivolous. She wrote in her will that she wants the upper part of her body to be cremated and the lower part to be buried after death. Hence, it took time to do the required arrangements at the hospital. I have her lower body here for the burial.
I was taken aback by such an uncanny wish. So far in my career, I've never heard anybody doing something like that. Just to be on the safe side, I demanded to speak with the lawyer, Mr. Patterson, who prepared the will. Without any hesitation, Scarlett gave me her full cooperation. The lawyer stated everything was true, and with that, the burial took place. Amidst all of this, the attraction between Scarlett and I grew strong. We hit it off with a couple of drinks, which then led to a couple of dates. Before we knew it, we had been dating for 5 months, and I knew I had to make it official. I proposed to her, and she accepted right away. Believe it or not, we were a perfect match. Happiness was flooding through our life. However, there was one thing Scarlett couldn't stand. It was my profession. Scarlett hated coming to the morgue when I was working. It was quite obvious, though. Not everyone could handle the smell of death. My business grew over time. I decided to hire an assistant to help me out. I recruited a young guy named Jimmy, who worked as a caretaker of the funeral home. Jimmy was hardworking, but one night things took a different turn. It was around 2:30 a.m., and heavy rain poured as bolts of lightning illuminated the night sky. I woke up hearing loud thunder and found the other side of the bed empty. Scarlett wasn't there. I got up to look for her. After searching the entire house, I still couldn't find her. I went to check the morgue, and as I entered the morgue, I could see Scarlett standing near the embalming table, her back facing me. A freshly arrived body was lying on the table. I called out to her. "Scarlett, what are you doing here?" She didn't move at all. I called her again. "Scarlett, is everything all right?" I was about to take a step forward when she turned around. Her hands were smeared in blood. She looked at me with scared eyes and said,
"John, the corpse was bleeding. There's something wrong with it,"
and fainted on the floor. Scarlett was right though. The corpse was cut in some places and stitched up again. But the stitching was so poor that during rigor mortis, blood and liquid started to burst out from the wounds. Scarlett explained to me that she went downstairs to check to see if all the windows were closed, and that she went to check the morgue as well. She said that she found drops of blood on the floor right under the embalming table. That sight traumatized her so much that she became numb with fear. We went upstairs to wash up and would deal with the mess in the morning. I woke up and quickly ran down to the morgue to take a closer look at the corpse, and shockingly found that the liver was missing. I knew that this had to be Jimmy's doing. Who else could do it? I was stunned to see his audacity. He must have stolen organs from these corpses to sell them illegally. I had to fire him that day. Even though he denied everything, I had to let him go, as Scarlett was too scared to be near a man with such alarming intentions. People like Jimmy are very capable of bringing trouble in the long run, so I had to kick him out. The shock of that night hit my wife real hard. She fell sick and couldn't get out of bed. One day I was thinking about what to do, just when her phone rang. It was Mr. Patterson. I didn't want to wake her up, so I picked up the call. I told him right away that Scarlett was not feeling well. He hesitated a bit, and then said, I don't want to disturb her at this moment, but can you please tell her to call me as soon as she wakes up? I asked him if there's anything serious, to which Mr. Patterson replied, well, she didn't submit the details of the buyer yet. We may be in legal trouble, Mr. Miller. Excuse me, but what details are you talking about? Oh, you don't know. When the hospital dissected her grandma's corpse, they found her liver and lungs missing. Scarlett said her grandma told her to donate her organs and promised to submit the paperwork in time. I wish I never took this case. Her grandma is one particular lady. Why do you think that? I mean, who makes such a bizarre wish 2 days before her death? I should have never approved that will. She didn't even sign the will properly. Scarlett pleaded with me, so I went ahead with it. Anyways, please tell her to call me soon. Mr. Patterson disconnected the call, and I stood there like a statue. A sense of unknown fear increased my heartbeat. Is it all connected? Her grandma's missing organs? That fishy will? Jimmy denying the theft of that liver? Is it all Scarlett? Every suspicion pointed at her. I turned around to wake her up, when suddenly, a metal vase hit me in the forehead. Everything went black, and I passed out. When I opened my eyes, my head was throbbing in pain. I found myself tied to a chair in the kitchen. With my blurry vision, I could see someone standing near the kitchen stove while cooking. It was Scarlett. Old 40s music was playing in the background, and she was cooking in a cheerful mood. What's going on? Scarlett? What are you—
Oh, you're awake! I'm making us lunch.
Why am I tied up like this?
So that you can't do anything reckless, hun.
What the hell is wrong with you?
Nothing. Everything was fine until that idiot Patterson called, and you just had to answer. But there's nothing to worry about anymore. I took care of everything. Look how peaceful he is. He's sleeping on the couch.
As my eyes went to the couch, I saw Mr. Patterson's bloody body lying there. His mouth was wide open. Eyes were staring at the ceiling, and his head was hollow. Yes, his skull was cracked open brutally, and there was no brain inside. I started to breathe rapidly, seeing such a vicious sight. Scarlett came right in front of my face and gazed into my eyes. Her caring stare is now taken over by a burning hunger. The smile that bewitched me all this time is now replaced with a terrifying grin. This is not the Scarlett I know. It was you. You stole that liver, not Jimmy. All that fear of dead bodies was fake, huh? Scarlett, what did you do with your grandma's organs? Did you sell those too? All these gruesome acts just for money?
Money? Oh, you're one naive man, aren't you? I didn't sell those organs, I ate them!
I was unable to believe her words. My heart raced to the point that I thought I could die at any moment. So that's why you married me. To get unlimited access to fresh corpses. I can't believe I fell for a freaking cannibal!
Don't be so harsh. That's not the only reason. I do love you. And trust me, once you try my new recipe, you'll understand.
Scarlett walked to the kitchen counter and picked up a plate. She then walked towards me and placed it on my lap. It was a pair of human brains sautéed in butter. She took a spoonful of that and said,
Come on, give it a try.
Damn you, you psycho woman! Stay away from me!
I said try it!
She started to shove the brains into my mouth like an animal. I vomited on the floor as soon as it touched my tongue. I kicked Scarlett's leg and she tripped, hitting her head hard on the kitchen counter. She screamed in pain, holding her bloody head. I dragged my chair over to the phone. Luckily, I had 911 on speed dial, as I pressed the number 9 button with my tongue.
Darling, please, just try once. I promise you'll love it. Then we'll have no more secrets. We can be together forever.
But I didn't wait anymore. I am the husband of a cannibal who got sentenced to prison for the murder of 2 people. After her grandmother died, she ate her lungs and liver right away. But to suppress this violent act, she forged her signature and made a fake will, which stated that her upper body was to be cremated. She thought no one would notice the missing organs, but the hospital noticed right away, as they saw the poor stitching Scarlett had done. She made up the entire story about organ donation, and then came to me to get rid of the other half. That's when she decided to marry me. She just wanted access to fresh organs. I mean, just think about it. She wouldn't have to kill anyone, and she could secretly feast on as many human bodies as she wanted. No one would notice the missing organs, and her secret will be buried with the dead. It may seem disturbing, but the world has no law stating punishment for the consumption of human meat. She was only punished for the murders. What about the people she ate? One thing I won't ever forget is the taste of those brains she forced me to eat. I can't say I really hated the taste, though.
I want to give a disclaimer about my story before sharing it with the world. Before doing so, I would like to keep the individuals within this story anonymous, so I will be utilizing alias names to protect the identity of the following individuals. The events of this story may be very disturbing to some viewers, so viewer discretion is highly advised. This story happened when I was in my late 30s. I was a full-time mortician and enjoyed every single second of my job. Seeing the dead carcasses of human remains come in and out of the morgue, it was symbolic in a sense where that was the end of the deceased person's existence in this world. It was equivalent to closing a cover of a book that told the story of an individual's life and then putting it away for good on a bookshelf. My wife of 16 years wasn't fond of my occupation much. To be honest, I don't exactly blame her, as any spouse dealing with the same circumstances probably underwent the same mutual feelings. My wife and I weren't exactly the wealthiest people, so we rented the basement of my best friend, who lived on the top floor with his wife and children. We were all mutual friends from high school, so that made our time living there much more bearable than living with complete strangers. I remember meeting my wife at our high school cafeteria. From the moment I laid eyes on her, I could tell she was going to be the one. We ended up dating, which eventually blossomed into a relationship and then of course marriage.
You're the best husband ever. You know that?
I wish I could say the same about you. I'm just joking. You are the greatest wife ever. Sound better?
Of course. Promise you'll never leave me?
You'll always be with me. A promise is a promise. Like I said before, we've been together for 16 long committed years, but not all fairy tales conclude with a happy ending. It was a Friday evening when I was out with some friends at a local gentleman's club for one of my colleagues' 40th birthday. I personally didn't tell my wife, as I didn't want to hear her fuss about watching other females dance exotically behind her back. So I let her know that I was visiting some family relatives. The time was roughly 11 p.m. when I began drinking beer after beer, shot glass after shot glass. I had completely lost count of the amount of beers I had consumed due to the overbearing amount of orders me and my friend put in on the tab. My surroundings became blurry as the temperature in the room gradually increased the longer I sat in one spot. I could legitimately feel my head throbbing and could hear every pulse exerting the blood from my veins to my temple. A head rush from hell then began to stir my brain up, as sweat began dripping down the side of my face. That's when my friend Jake jokingly confronts me by saying, "Dude, what would you do if your wife ended up finding out that you were here? It's not a big deal. We've been married for 16 years, so she's not going anywhere." Speak of the devil. You gonna answer that? I remember hearing and feeling my phone vibrate on the side of my pants pocket. Answer it. I can't. She must know that I'm here. Dude, what are you talking? Just shut up and mind your business. Dude, I can buy you a lap dance if that'll calm you down. Sheesh. I felt like my friend was intentionally trying to exasperate me immensely, like he was poking the bear and was questioning the integrity of my relationship. I honestly felt like, no matter who approached or talked to me that night, I was going to throw an impromptu hissy fit from the paranoid state and guilty conscience that manifested inside my head. That's when I couldn't bear the sight of sitting at that club anymore, nor could I stand any interactions with the people in general any longer. I abruptly got up to leave the premises, as my friends began talking under their breath saying, "Did you guys see how much he was sweating? He must have been nervous as hell from his wife. Huh, hope he got a prenup." How the hell could he sweat so much? The AC is freaking cold as hell. As I make my way out of the gentleman's club, I began to slowly tumble towards my house as I felt extremely intoxicated. I contemplated calling an Uber, but just decided to walk home, as the walk wasn't that far and it gave me an opportunity to sober up. My leg that had the pocket with my phone inside it began feeling slightly jittery from the radiation. I remember taking my phone out of my pocket and seeing that I had at least 100 missed calls from my wife. This led me to believe that something odd was going on. As I got closer to my house, I could hear a swarm of fire trucks and police sirens echoing throughout my neighborhood. After a couple steps closer, I could then make out that my house had been engulfed in fire. That's when I ran towards one of the police sergeants standing nearby and yelled, "That's my house! Please help! My wife and my best friend are in there!" "Sir, I'm going to need you to calm down. Our fire department is taking care of it right now." "Hello? Sir, are you okay?" And that's when I blacked out. About 24 hours after that incident, it was announced that my wife and my best friend were officially pronounced dead at the scene, and had suffered third-degree burns from the fire that had burned the household down. The investigators were unfortunately unable to identify what might have caused the fire, but they speculate that it might have been caused by a gas leak from the furnace in our basement. But I have a confession. I was the sole reason of why that fire happened. I couldn't stand to see my wife or my best friend alive any longer. Prior to their death, I remember heading home from work early one day, only to catch them having an affair with each other. It was at that point that I could have confronted the both of them, but instead, I took a different approach and texted my wife saying, "I'm gonna be home late, going to have a drink with the boys after work is done." Her response was,
Have fun. Text me before you come home. Love you.
That drove me to the point of insanity, which made me set a part of the house on fire before sprinting to the gentleman's club to meet with my friends. I'm a little ashamed by my actions, but at the same time, I felt like it was the right thing to do, as they're both in a better place right now. My conscience would have been worse if my friend's wife and children were involved, but luckily, they weren't, as they were fortunately at a close relative's house. When going to both my wife's and my best friend's funeral, I honestly had the urge to disclose to his wife how much of a cheating and ungrateful bastard he was, but I obviously kept my mouth shut until now. Despite my wife having an affair, I still miss and love her dearly. As deceitful and untrustworthy as my wife was, I still found it in me to forgive her for her perfidious acts. The memories we had shared since high school were something I still cherished, even if it was a little tarnished or compromised from the affair. I remember spreading her lips wide open, using my thumb and index finger. I even had the courtesy of peeling back open her eyelids, just so I could see more of those beautiful eyes. Look at her. So beautiful. You look exactly the same way when we first dated. You know that? The deeper I indulged myself by gazing into her eyes, the more emotional I became, as I knew that this was going to be the last time seeing the glistening sparkle shine in her pupils. I began to arch over her corpse and leaned over by drawing my face about an inch over her burnt, charred face, just like we used to when she was alive. That's when I stuck my tongue out and began to French kiss her, exactly the way we used to do it when she was alive. I forgive you, Hannah. I told you that you'll always be with me. I'm a man of my word, right? A promise is a promise.
This story is not for the faint-hearted. If you are, then it's time to press that pause button and turn back. This is an utterly disturbing incident that left me in shambles. I'm a mortician. After medical school, I joined a funeral home in my local town. The first few weeks were fine. The only issue was the after-hours cleaning, because the janitor was out of town for some reason. But still, I didn't complain. After finishing my job, I dutifully burnt all the waste in the basement incinerator. During my medical school days, I've had so many corpse experiences that I could easily stand any gruesome-looking corpse without throwing up or getting scared. Seeing a dead hand tremble, a big toe wiggle, a sudden twitching of the eyes were no big deal to me. I called it the final spark, which generally occurs during the embalming stage. These little details are going to be relevant later. It was a dull Wednesday afternoon, and I was working in the morgue with my new buddy Samuel. He was a 5'11", dark-haired man who lost the battle of life to cancer. I was puncturing the organs in the abdomen to let the gas and fluid out when I heard footsteps in the corridor. I turned back and saw a man standing at the door with a smile on his face and a mop in his hand. "G'day, sir. I'm Jonathan, the janitor. You must be the new doctor." I smiled and said, "Nice to meet you, Jonathan, but I'm no doctor. I don't really save lives." Don't know if he got my sarcasm, but he gave me a people-pleasing giggle and said, "I was out for my sister's wedding. It must have been tiring for you to do all the cleaning after such long shifts. But you don't have to worry anymore. I'm back now." I thanked him for showing concern and got back to work. Jonathan walked away while mopping the corridor. Thank goodness I didn't have to stay after work for the cleanings anymore. Once I was done, I put the corpse in the freezer and left right away. Jonathan cleaned everything and locked up the funeral home before leaving. He even arrived before me, so a lot of the extra responsibilities were lifted from my shoulders. One thing I liked about Jonathan was that he kept to himself and never bothered me. One day I was doing paperwork when the owner called me. He said that a new corpse was about to arrive. A close friend of his lost his daughter recently. He also told me that I must do a perfect job so that they can say their final goodbye to their darling daughter. I asked him the cause of her death, to which he told me that she committed suicide. The girl hung herself from the ceiling of her room. I told him that it won't be difficult to prepare her as her body would probably be intact, but the owner interrupted me saying, "Actually, there's a little issue." I sensed the tension in his voice, so I asked, "What is it?" He paused for a bit and said, "The sudden pressure on her neck has made her tongue stick out. Excuse me. I don't know how to put it, but you have to make her look the way she did. Her parents are shattered." I understood the gravity of the situation and assured him that I will do my best. The body arrived shortly after. I went through her file for more details. The girl's name was Kelly and she was just 17 years old. I felt bad for her and her parents. She was lying on the table zipped up inside a plastic bag, I changed into my gloves and usual uniform and opened the bag to take a look at her. By now, you all have gotten a clear idea that death doesn't shock me anymore. But as her face showed up, a sudden gasp came out of my mouth. Kelly was lying still. She was looking at the ceiling with her wide, pale blue eyes. Her curly blonde hair still smelled of shampoo, but her mouth... God, I will never forget that. 60% of her tongue was hanging out of her mouth and resting on her chest. My description does not do it justice, as the sight was way more horrible than my words. It took me some time to get my shit back together. I went to my desk and had some water. The embalming table stood behind me. I finally calmed myself down and turned around to go back. Believe me or not, I found Kelly's head tilted in my direction. She was looking at me with a lively stare while her tongue hung from the edge of the table. I blamed the sudden change of position on rigor mortis and walked to the table. I then moved her face to the previous position and began my work. I opened her mouth using a gag and started putting her tongue back inside. I had to glue her lips so that by any sudden movement, the tongue never comes out. I also glued her eyes. Then, I washed and cleaned her. After making the incision, I sat on a chair nearby and watched her bloody fluids draining out. Once the fluids drained out, I got up to inject the formaldehyde-based chemicals to finish the embalming process. While doing so, I heard Jonathan's voice behind me. It's sad to see a young lady fade away, isn't it, Doctor? Even though I told him to not call me a doctor, he did anyway. I replied in a low voice. Yes, it is. How old was she? 17. Jeez, death is cruel. He exhaled in disappointment and started mopping the floor. I finished up within a few hours and left. I bought some new paints on my way home to deck her up the next morning. That entire night I couldn't sleep, as all I could think about was Kelly. I kept drawing pictures in my mind, thinking how she was when she was alive. The next day at work, I discovered something very weird. I found Kelly's eyes and mouth wide open. Not just that, there were bruises on her wrists, as if she put pressure on her hands. Yes, I know it sounds impossible, and no, I wasn't intoxicated. I again glued her mouth and eyes without thinking much about this, but at the back of my mind, I felt something wasn't right with this corpse. No matter how I placed it, it kept changing its position when I wasn't looking. Things took an eerie turn. I was getting highly disturbed by all this. I don't believe in ghosts, so I decided to get to the bottom of this. I placed a security camera inside the morgue to see what exactly happens here at night. I didn't tell anyone about this because everyone would have called me crazy. The next morning, I rushed to work to see last night's footage. I sat in my cabin and logged into the laptop. The first few hours, I didn't see anything. Kelly kept lying on the embalming table, covered under a white sheet. There was no one in the room, and everything was quiet. But suddenly, the morgue door opened, and a man walked in. I knew this man. He walked to Kelly and lifted the cover in one go. What he did next disgusted me to the core. He started running his fingers on Kelly's cheeks, and then leaned on her to do more obscene things that I can't even speak of. I couldn't watch anymore. I sat on the chair, hiding my face in my palms. I was shocked. All this time, it was Jonathan. He's the reason why Kelly had those bruises on her arms. I rushed to the washroom and vomited, thinking how sick this man was. I had no idea that behind the people-pleasing smile lurks a necrophiliac. I wanted to beat the hell out of him for pulling off this shameful behavior, but before handing him over to the cops, I planned to catch him in the act. Be it dead or alive, she's just a 17-year-old girl who had already suffered enough. I told Jonathan I was leaving early. Little did he know I was going to come back after dinner. I left the window in my office open. At around 9 p.m., I sneaked inside from there and waited for the culprit to come back. After 10 to 15 minutes, I heard the main door open. Footsteps appeared in the hallway. I quickly turned on the laptop to watch his every move. Jonathan entered the morgue and took off the cover from the embalming table. Kelly was lying on the table like before. He leaned onto her face, and just then the security camera malfunctioned. Glitches appeared on the screen, and it turned black. Before I could act on it, I heard a spine-chilling scream outside. I bolted out of the office and started to run towards the morgue. As I reached near the door, I found it locked. Jonathan was screaming in excruciating pain. I could hear a commotion going on inside the morgue, like he was struggling for his life. The lights of the entire funeral home started to flicker like crazy, and heavy wind came from the rattling windows. I tried my best to open the door, but I couldn't. This continued for a few more minutes, and then everything became dead silent. The morgue door opened on its own after that. I rushed inside to see broken glasses dispersed on the floor and equipment scattered here and there. It was a mess. My eyes went to the left corner of the room, and I froze on the ground. Jonathan was lying on the floor dead. His jaw was broken, as if a strong force smashed it in one go. Blood was coming out of his mouth like a fountain, and above all that, he had no tongue. I slowly walked close to the table to take a look at Kelly. She was lying still, like she always did. Her eyes and mouth were wide open again. But this time, I found something more. Inside her mouth rested a chunk of a bloody human tongue that wasn't hers. I called the cops and provided them with the footage that I could gather, but Jonathan's death remained unsolved. After all, no law in this universe is capable to punish a corpse with murder charges. If you ask me, I strongly feel like he got what he deserved, and Kelly took her revenge.